Despite being one of the two unbeaten teams left in the NFL right now, there seems to be this sentiment getting thrown around about the Philadelphia Eagles that they're pretenders or they're frauds because they don't win in dominating fashion. You know, they barely beat the Patriots week 1, 25-20. They got past the Vikings 34-28 week 2. They got a pretty solid victory against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I thought that was a pretty dominant win. They beat them 25-11, and the Buccaneers currently are the first place team in the NFC South. And then they beat the Commanders in overtime 34-31. I get that Philadelphia doesn't look as dominant as what they did last year, but I don't think that makes them frauds. All right, we have to be very careful when it comes to labeling teams pretenders or frauds. The Philadelphia Eagles, if you were to look at their roster and compare it to the rest of the NFL, they got the most talented roster in the whole entire league. The only teams that rival Philadelphia in roster talent are probably the 49ers and the Dallas Cowboys, and that's it. So when it comes to Philadelphia, you know that from a talent standpoint, they're a good enough team to be able to compete for a championship. But the problem that people keep referring to that they say Philadelphia has is that when you look at the turnover that they dealt with during this past offseason, losing both coordinators, Jonathan Gannon to the Arizona Cardinals, and you have Shane Steichen, who now is the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. And anytime you lose two outstanding coordinators, it definitely is going to be a pretty big loss. But at the same time, though, the Philadelphia Eagles have a veteran team. They got a lot of veteran players on that locker room. Yeah, you do have a good amount of young players in there, such as Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, and whatnot, Nakobe Dean. But for the most part, I think that the Philadelphia Eagles have reached a point that, you know, they're going to lose some talented coordinators every once in a while, but they're going to be able to employ good coordinators to replace those guys because they're the Philadelphia Eagles. And with them being one of the best franchises in the NFL, there are going to be plenty of coordinator candidates that are going to be highly regarded, that are going to want the opportunity to coach at Philly, because they know that if they do well, they more times than likely are going to become a head coach. The coordinators that Philly currently has right now, they aren't as good as Jonathan Gannon and Shane Steichen, but I don't really think they're that bad. And I think that too many people make too much fuss over, you know, point differential, margin of victory. Who gives a damn about being dominant? I care about the team that wins the fucking game. That's all that really matters at the end of the day, the wins and the losses. And the Philadelphia Eagles are 4-0. To call this team a pretender is disrespectful to me. All right? They're 4-0 for a reason. You're not a 4-0 team if you have a weak coaching staff or if you have a weak roster. They're not 4-0 because they're a fraud football team. They're 4-0 because they're one of the most talented teams in the whole entire National Football League, and point differential doesn't completely define how good the team is. The New England Patriots had one of the best point differentials in NFL history and got smacked by the New York Giants in the Super Bowl. Not once, but twice, to Eli Manning. So that just goes to show you that just because you look dominant in the regular season, that doesn't mean that you're just going to completely dominate for the whole entire playoffs and you're just automatically going to win the Super Bowl. There's a reason why the games get played. I think it's kind of idiotic to label a team a fraud that's undefeated right now and currently has one of the best rosters in the NFL. Yeah, you don't really like the fact that Nick Sirianni is more of a general manager in the sense, in terms of how he runs the football team. He kind of just oversees everything. And I know general manager isn't the proper term for it. I think they refer to it as a CEO kind of head coach. He doesn't really get hands-on with anything. He more so just hires coordinators and lets those guys do their jobs. And, you know, he just micromanages everything. But I don't really think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's like if he could hire Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon, why can't these other coordinators that he have potentially become good hires? You see, like, too many people get wrapped up in these early season takes or these early season wins or losses, when at the end of the day, the pretenders start to separate themselves from the contenders around Thanksgiving. So we truly aren't going to know just how great of a team Philadelphia is until we get to the later portion of this season around November. That's when we're really going to have a good idea of who Philadelphia is. But right now, calling this team frauds, pretenders, I think that's ridiculous. They're undefeated. It doesn't matter how they win. They're winning games. And even last year, early during the season, they didn't dominate everybody. They barely beat the Detroit Lions week 1 last year. They beat the Lions 38-35 week 1 of the 2022 NFL season. They barely beat the Jaguars. They beat them 29-21. They barely beat the damn Arizona Cardinals. They beat them 20-17 early last season. So it's not like Philadelphia was just running through everybody on their whole entire schedule. And it's funny how people are trying to ask the question, are the Philadelphia Eagles legitimate contenders with the way that they're winning and how disappointing their new coaching hires have been? But nobody kept that same energy when the Dallas Cowboys lost to the Arizona Cardinals. You know, the Cowboys lost to the Arizona Cardinals, and then all of a sudden, they win against the New England Patriots, and now everybody's back on the Dallas Cowboys Super Bowl hype train. But we don't want to have that same level of realism when it comes to evaluating the Philadelphia Eagles and where they rank in the Super Bowl conversation. It's really idiotic to label this team a pretender because they don't win convincingly. Who gives a damn about winning convincingly in the NFL? The majority of NFL games are decided by one possession, regardless of how good of a team you are. The Kansas City Chiefs were supposed to blow out the New York Jets, and yet they nearly lost to them. And Zach Wilson had the best game of his career. And yet nobody's calling the Kansas City Chiefs pretenders. Not every single team is the same team that they were last year. You see, the NFL is always changing. It's always a forever evolving game. Just because the Philadelphia Eagles were a more dominant team last year when they made it to the Super Bowl doesn't mean that they're going to have the same level of dominance if they make it back to the Super Bowl this year. You don't get the same team twice back-to-back years. Every team normally has a new identity of some sort. Now, there are still certain things with the Philadelphia Eagles that you know are forever going to be there, such as having great quarterback play, a good offensive line, one of the best receiving corps in the NFL, and you got a pretty talented defense, even though the defense has dropped off pretty slightly. I don't think it's a big drop off, but this definitely isn't the same elite defense that we saw last year. This secondary isn't as good as what it was in 2022, but in hindsight, when I'm looking at the Philadelphia Eagles, I think that they have a good enough team that it's kind of dumb to label them frauds or pretenders because they don't win as convincingly as you think they should. Yeah, the Dallas Cowboys make it look nice when they blow out teams that they're supposed to blow out, but are they going to be able to beat the San Francisco 49ers? Are they going to be able to beat some of the best teams in the league when it matters? That's all that really matters at the end of the day. The Philadelphia Eagles are unbeaten. They're undefeated. They're not pretenders. They're not frauds. They are legitimate Super Bowl contenders. We need to stop trying to nitpick great teams. People have the tendency early in the season to nitpick and overly criticize great teams and give too much praise way too early to teams that haven't really proven anything. Like, you saw how quick people were to anoint the Miami Dolphins to be the next best thing in the AFC East. And they got trounced by the Buffalo Bills this past weekend. So the national media, they got a tendency just to be overly critical of great teams that already have proven themselves. And they have a tendency to overhype teams that aren't really that proven. I think the Philadelphia Eagles aren't pretenders. I don't care about the turnover that they've had on the coaching staff. They're 4-0 right now. They may not be as dominant as what they were last year, but all that matters is that they're 4-0, they're winning games, and I still like them to make it out of the NFC this year.